After the deadly terror attacks in Paris, the presidential candidate's knowledge regarding foreign policy, well, let's face it, it's been under an intense microscope, particularly on the GOP side. And that's where Dr. Ben Carson has attracted extra attention because of his repeated dubious statements on the topic. Dwayne Claridge, a top advisor to Dr. Carson on terrorism and national security, said just today, moments ago, in fact, in an interview with the New York Times, quote, nobody has been able to sit down with him and have him get one iota of intelligent information about the Middle East, and that Carson needed weekly conference calls briefing him on foreign policy so that, quote, we can make him smart.
Oh, dear.
Tammy Bruce and Pete Hegseth back with me. Now, I'll start this conversation off with that this is from the New York Times. Perhaps we'll hear later that Dr. Carson was confused about the administration's foreign policy, but there's no doubt about it. In fact, before we even start, let's just take a listen to one of his recent interviews, this one from Fox News Sunday, because he did sound just a little bit confused.
My point being that if we get out there and we really lead and it appears that we're making progress, then all of the Arab states and even the non-Arab states, who I think are beginning to recognize that the jihad movement is global. It is not just local in the Middle East.
All right, I could see the wheels turning as he was speaking, and you can see him struggling, and it felt like he piecemealed an answer together from different questions, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's not underestimate the extent to which the New York Times will attempt to sow the seeds of discord.
Absolutely.
So we don't actually know what the advisor said.
Consider the source.
Consider the source big time. If the source is correct, then he might need to get rid of some of his advisors who are grousing to the New York Times about how little their candidate knows. That's a bad idea, Campaign 101. However, his gut's in the right place. When you hear his gut, he's in the right place on his instincts. I think, and it says elsewhere in the article, the advisors just felt like he's overthinking it. He knows that every utterance is going to be analyzed here and elsewhere, and so he's always trying to think, okay, how do I sound smart rather than sort of internalizing all the information and just responding to events. Well, the reality is national security and foreign policy, it takes time to understand the nuances and all the pitfalls and how you articulate it. It's tough to learn on
There's
the
no doubt about it. I mean, listen, simplify it. Donald Trump says I would bomb the boop out of ISIS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, look, there's a point of being over-prepared, and that could be a problem here. And then also the issue of being comfortable with where you are. Ben Carson should be the last person to be worrying about what the media is going to say and think. This is the challenge for every one of these candidates. This is the proving ground, however. And of all the issues that the president needs to be smart about, it is foreign policy. This is the existential issue that we face. And, look, even when Barack Obama was elected, I told my listeners, don't worry, the system is so large, there'll be so many people around this one guy, he can't do any damage. What Barack Obama has shown us is that one person matters, that what the president thinks matters, and his talent
having
matters.
said that, Tammy, he did damage, to Pete's point. I don't know if he did damage as a tactician per se, but as an ideologue. That might be an advantage for Ben Carson. We know he wants to kill the enemy. We know how he feels about radical Islam. On the other hand, if you're an ideologue and you think that these really aren't necessarily bad people, they're just in bad circumstances. You can't put a good policy around that. This is the thing.
This, again, Ben Carson's in a field with a lot of people who know a lot of things and are very smart, so he's not in a field alone. We do know, though, the future is going to require a president, like Reagan as an example, who grasps the dynamic in its totality, who is confident, who wants advisors, who knows how to manage that, and that's the question.
And before we go, guys,
Carson.
let me ask you, does this topic, and you think it's going to be the number one topic for the election?
I do.
Does it lend itself more to the senators than the other guys running? I think
it could, but you still have an electorate that says the experts have been running our foreign policy for decades, and it's still in shambles. So I just got an email from Ben Carson's campaign, just a standard one that they sent out. The title is "No More Politically Correct Wars." I think you're going to see from Carson him going back to some of those basic slogans of "We can't fight war the same way we did before," with all the nuance of the senators and the experts.
Is that just a slogan versus a man who understands in his heart the nature of what's occurring in the world?
Right.